I want to take some time to talk about a pretty controversial topic. And this one is going to be diving relatively deep into some pretty brutal aspects of human nature and things that exist inside of us that we don't really like to pay attention to, especially in the topic of relationships. So, to start off, I gotta state that humanity in many ways is a sick species. It's a fact. And I don't say this to judge humanity or because I hate humanity or any of this stuff or because I hold resentment towards humanity. It's just an observation. This is the current state of humanity. I hope it changes in the future, but for now, humanity is a sick species. Humanity is unconscious. Humanity is downright twisted in a lot of ways. And the majority of our species currently lives in pretty horrible survival conditions where they can't really raise their consciousness. And even many people who do live in pretty good survival conditions still don't raise their consciousness. They just simply don't value it. And I'm not saying this in a judgmental way. I'm just saying some facts about our species at the moment. Right? Most people, even in the developed world, do not raise their consciousness very much. They don't really do very deep shadow work. They scratch the surface a little bit sometimes, and it's only a few people. To get someone to go really deep, all the way to awakening, or to really investigating the collective shadow in a very direct way where they're like conscious of it, this is very rare. This is probably 1%, if not less than 1% of people. So most of our species is trapped in levels of development and consciousness that are absolutely stuck in selfishness, personal bias, deception, fear, and even manipulation and exploitation. This is the norm. Right? I actually want you to get that, is that things like selfishness, self-absorption, this is the norm for our species as of right now. And we have a tremendous ability to grow and develop as a species, but for various reasons that, in a sense, I personally believe you have to have compassion for, we're kind of stuck. Right? Growth is hard, change is hard, people live in all sorts of difficult survival conditions. 86 to 88% of the world lives in undeveloped countries, right? I live in Canada, so I mean, it's a lot easier for me to self-actualize and self-transcend and all this stuff. And all the things that I mentioned, like, personal bias, or selfishness, fear, even manipulation, exploitation, this stuff holds tremendous survival value because survival is what the species has been doing forever. We've been trying to survive. And survival is a pretty brutal thing. Survival by any means necessary, holding on to power, right? Being biased towards ourself and our self-agenda. Getting what we want regardless of others. And I don't want you to take your own level of development for granted. Odds are, if you resonate with a lot of this stuff, you're probably relatively above average in your consciousness as a human being. And even the fact that you can be watching this video is already really profound. Right? The fact that you're in a place where you have extra energy so that you can give it to this video rather than needing to go find water or food or defend yourself against a neighboring tribe trying to invade yours. Right? This is already really profound. You already have excess energy that you can really put into your self-actualization. You can put into whatever you want, really. So all those things, oh my God, there's a bee harassing me. All those things that I mentioned, I don't want you to view them with like this very judgmental approach. It's important to actually have compassion for the suffering of humanity. Right? So why am I saying this? Right? Why am I talking about this in a video called The Shadow of Relationships? Because our selfishness, our personal BS, basically, infects our relationships. All this brutal stuff about human nature finds its way into our relationships. and is actually very fundamental to relationships. Because relationships are about getting needs met. It's about survival. This is a core, undeniable component. I don't think that's all that relationships are about, but this is the foundation. If something isn't giving you value in your life, you're not really going to do it. You're not going to date that person or whatever. Right? So there's a core component here of getting what you want. Survival, your self-agenda. It's brutal. Right? I don't say this in a judgmental way. Once again, it's just a fact. Right? Relationships are, of course, about getting what you want. This is like an undeniable component to them that a lot of people don't want to hear, and especially because we're fed BS Disney movies growing up. We just have all sorts of ideals about them. Right? And here it's kind of a spectrum between heaven and hell. And I'm giving you the hell perspective right now. I'm not giving you the heaven perspective right now because I'm talking about the shadow of human relationships. Maybe in the future I'll make like the beauty of human relationships. But I think like this kind of stuff is really important to actually talk about and be aware of because it exists. It's in us. It's in our collective unconscious. It's in our minds. Right? And we have to be aware of it and clean it up and get a good understanding of our selfishness so that, you know, we basically don't destroy our own world. We don't destroy each other as a species. I want to talk about a pretty interesting norm within the context of human connections. And this norm is to basically hold unconscious frustration, anger, resentment, power struggles, resistance, judgment, and hatred even for the opposite sex. Basically the desire to actually exploit and manipulate the opposite sex into getting what you want. And men and women do this to each other a lot. Right? And if you actually want a conscious relationship, you have to acknowledge this. You have to acknowledge the unconscious dynamics that exist. It's the norm for people to hold forms of frustration, resentment, pure judgment, and even downright hatred sometimes, not all the time, for the opposite sex. Right? Think about it like a spectrum. Like there's the pure hatred for the opposite sex on this end, and then there's a pure acceptance here. Most people are pretty in the middle, but there's people here and then there's people further over here. Right? Most people are somewhere along the spectrum, not even really the middle. I mean, to be honest, I don't know exactly where most people would be on the spectrum. I'm just one person. And if you actually want to have a conscious relationship with the opposite sex, you have to go in and you actually need to really dig into some of this stuff. Right? The suffering that you experience in your relationships, right, is probably pretty great. And it's easy to start really feeding into this collective shadow of just really hating the opposite sex and judging them, things like this. It's easy to kind of just fall into these traps, right? Especially nowadays with the internet, which I'll be talking about later. But you really must clean this up. There's no way around this one. Basically, our history and our psychological differences has created our collective unconscious. Of course, men abusing women, exploiting them for many years, right? Men usually holding more power. And of course, women have been exploiting men, manipulating them, and doing that for quite a long time as well. Men do it in a very sort of political way, and even just in a very relational way, right? Basically, our species is one of just exploiting each other for personal gain. Attachment to our own selfishness for personal gain. This is like a massive component of human history. And this kind of stuff exists inside of you. It's not in some evil person. It's not in some horrible politician. It's not in that corrupt and wicked dictator over there. It's in you. See, that's the point here. We're talking about the shadow of human relationships that exist within you. These corrupt tendencies exist within you. And if you have trouble admitting that, that's your corruption. If you have trouble even acknowledging your own selfishness, your bias, your potential, and even your tendencies to manipulate, because damn near everyone actually does manipulate, right? If you can't see that straight up, this is your corruption. It's a hard thing to recognize how corrupt you are. But this is a part of shadow work. This is really a part of, looking into the unconscious. It's the things that we avoid, the things that we don't like. So our psychological differences also contribute to this dynamic, because of course men and women have a bunch of psychological differences, and the differences don't always align in a harmonious way, and usually when we don't get what we want, we just kind of kick and scream and get reactive, and that's basically life. And all sorts of complex phenomena has contributed to this shadow, right? And as a byproduct, I'm getting bit by a mosquito. Basically, as a byproduct of this shadow and keeping it so unconscious, we hold all sorts of resentment towards the opposite sex, right? Kind of like how humanity also has a collective shadow of racism, of course, right? It's a similar thing with the sexes as well, right? So basically, generally speaking in generals here, each sex finds it very hard to properly understand the experience of the opposite sex. Why? Because we're both so selfish. We're both so stuck in what we want. We're both so stuck in our own agenda, in our own needs. We're both so fixed and rigid on just getting what we want. I mean, is this not what we're doing most of the time? Are we really just being selfless angels who are so loving? I mean, if you want to be a selfless angel, right, if we want some examples of that throughout history, who is that? Jesus, Buddha, Gandhi. These are rare people, right? Getting to that point takes quite literally decades of inner work. And all these people had to go through exactly what I'm talking about right now. They had to realize how deeply corrupt and biased their own mind is so that they could awaken. They had to go through this kind of stuff. So each sex, right, has trouble empathizing with the experience of the opposite sex. Men don't understand how women can be very afraid, right? Quite literally afraid for their lives, right? Men don't understand how traumatizing it is to be sexually assaulted or sexually harassed, and basically every woman experiences sexual harassment, and the majority, by a lot, experience sexual assault as well, at least just like being groped. Right? And a lot of women don't really understand the complexities and nuances around male sexuality as well. They don't really understand how hard it actually is, how confusing it can actually be as well. And of course, this builds up forms of resentment, hatred, judgment, things like this. Right? See, a core component of the reality of being a man and trying to get very good with women, right? Learning how to attract them and keep a fantastic woman in your life. A core component of this is suffering, right? Because a man is born into total ignorance, right? School, he's not really taught very much at all, for the most part. Nothing too useful. And he finds himself, right, having strong desires for sex, right? For closeness, intimacy, feeling valued by a very feminine girl, right? Wanting her to trust him, to surrender to him. Right? And the reality of getting really good at this is one of failure over and over and over and over again, being rejected, pain, right? right? We're not really taught how to empathize with the opposite sex's experience, right? I mean, we're never taught that basically ever. We're not even taught how to get our own needs met in a functional way. Right? So the reality of a man trying to get better with women is basically learning through a lot of suffering and pain, or going to workshops, listening to videos, reading books. And even that's painful, because you'll read a book and you're gonna have to realize, like, oh, like I was doing everything wrong. I was so fundamentally wrong in everything I thought. It's just like, it actually requires integrity, which is why a lot of men aren't very good with women. It's very hard, actually, to get. It requires like a desire to actually seek truth. How do I like very honestly navigate this area of life in a competent way? Right? And of course, like I mentioned earlier, a core component is that we're stuck in our own survival agenda. We're stuck within the perspectives of how do I get what I want to survive? This is like very fundamental to human life as a whole. This is fundamental to how we survive as a species. This isn't just like a little thing of just like, oh, my relationship, right? Or like dating and, how do I have some good sex? Or how do I get like a fantastic provider husband who makes me feel safe and secure and seen, right? It's far beyond this, right? These are the very mechanisms by which our species, uses to survive, right? Selfishness has a lot of survival value, and humans are extremely selfish, right? Just look at where your own attention goes throughout the day. Is it not always stuck in your own thoughts? Is it not very obviously stuck in your own agenda? Right? If you're watching this video, this means that you have freed up energy so that you can transcend the self. You can self-actualize. You can transcend just your selfishness. Right? You actually have the potential to be a fully enlightened Buddha or Jesus Christ. Right? Right? You have excess energy to put towards certain things. So when we're stuck in our own agenda of just what we want and how we want things to be, right? This whole approach is not conducive to actually having a more conscious relationship. A conscious relationship, right, of course involves getting what you need in a healthy way, but it doesn't end there. It goes beyond that. It transcends the ego. It begins to move past that, right? You can actually ask questions like, what does this soul need to, experience in order to evolve? What does this person need in order to actually grow? And not even just that, it's like you're able to step out of yourself and into the perspective of the other person and their needs and why they need them, and actually not kind of gaslight them and like see it as like important, right? For example, if I'm reading evolutionary psychology, right, and a lot of the things they talk about attraction in evolutionary psychology, right, especially for women, right, like what are women attracted to generally, right? They'll say resources and status, right? And for men, they'll say physical beauty and youthfulness, right? And that's very triggering from the point of view of, one sex to the other. But look at it like this. This isn't just about getting what you want. This is about how our species survives as a whole. Right? Men desiring youthful women who appear healthy, right? This is how our species has survived. These were women who could get pregnant, right? This is how men could actually reproduce. So it's not just about getting what you want. There's a larger scheme going on here. There's like the agenda of nature itself. And women being attracted to resources and status and qualities within a man that display his ability to get those things, right? And this is all just the evolutionary psychology point of view. There's more points of view. This is one point of view, okay? So if it's too triggering, it's one point of view. Come on. Right? That point of view, right, from a man, right, well, you know, if I'm very selfish and delusional, I'll be like, like all women are gold diggers, right? But no, that's not what's going on. Not even close. Like, these are the things that the female psychology had to, you know, value and be attracted to in order to survive and get their needs met. This was survival. And it's like you have to have an ability to empathize with that. To not get so reactive about it because you're completely stuck in your own self-agenda of just getting what you want. Right? The psychological differences that we have can, you know, create tension. Right? And humanity, like I've said in so many of my videos, is a very unconscious species, sick in many ways, emotionally unintelligent. So when things run counter to our agenda, we just kind of snap. It's easy to just start building up tension and resentment, frustration, anger, things like this. So I'm going to address this a little bit more head on right now, like the pure, just unconsciousness towards the opposite sex. The pure perspective of like hating them, judging them, just being frustrated with them, right? It's a fucking shadow projection, man. Like, right? So, with the rise of certain problems that exist in society, there's also the rise of ideas that pop up in order to help solve those problems. For example, men having dating issues, right? There's the rise of men's dating advice, right? And then with any sort of form of ideas, there's going to be extremes. And within these extremes, there's usually a lot of dysfunction, shadow, things like this. And I'm going to just be pointing specifically to some ideologies just as examples, not to attack anyone. I don't care about attacking anyone. I'm just going to say some of them just so you get an image. And I'll start with men first, and then I'll move on to traps that a lot of women can fall into with ideologies. So the first one is the red pill on YouTube. It's kind of just like this dating ideology. But the thing is it's not just a dating ideology. See, any ideology, right, the way ideology works is that when you expose yourself to it over and over and over and over again, over time, it slowly radicalizes you. And when you're, operating within any particular ideology across the board, the shadow dynamics of that ideology will infect your mind, and the limitations of that ideology will now become your limitations. So the red pill is a pretty interesting example, and various forms of pickup as well. I don't really think I can write off all pickup. I guess it depends how you define pickup, right? Like, there's a lot of, right? Like, it's not that even these perspectives are 100% wrong, right? Like, something like pickup will teach a guy to, go out there and like talk to women and like actually build social skills that are needed to attract women. Like, that's obviously fine. But it's just within these ideologies, there's an underlying sort of view and an energy that you can pick up on intuitively of like just kind of selfishness and like frustration towards women. And within the red pill, it's so obvious. It's just blatantly obvious with so many of the guys on YouTube. They just are like blatantly frustrated towards women. And of course, what the hell is that? That's the shadow that I'm talking about in this video. Right? Next, and I really honestly think this one is going to trigger people. Next is very radical anti-men groups and very, very radical forms of feminism. And I'm not talking about regular feminism, right? Making a little bit of a nuanced point here. It's pretty easy to understand. I'm talking about very radical forms of it that basically run, these ideologies are ran by ideas like life without men, or anything a man can do, a woman can do, but better. Right? These are the kinds of traps that women fall into. Right? And I understand. Right? Men were terrible to women for a very long time. And of course, like I've said, our history has built up this collective shadow. The trap that you don't want to fall into is remaining in this cycle of shit for the rest of your life. You want to just acknowledge that you're in it, and that these parts of you are sick. That's like there's no other way around it. When you harbor a bunch of resentment and hatred and judgment towards the opposite sex as a whole, right off 90 to 95% of them, right? I've actually received comments like this. There's emotional and energetic and mental sickness there. I don't say that as a judgmental way again. Like I'm not just like judging you. That's not what I'm doing here. It's like you actually just have to get clear about that. That this is a form of energy that's stuck inside of you and it's actually dysfunctional. And that if you want to really have harmonious connections to the opposite sex, you need to examine these unconscious dynamics that exist inside of you. Judgments towards them, feelings of frustration and resentment towards them. And I'm not saying to put yourself in dangerous situations. I'm not saying to not have boundaries. I'm not saying, whatever, do what makes you feel secure. Right? I'm saying that you're going to be very fundamentally delusional about the opposite sex if a lot of this stuff is just in your shadow. And you're going to miss the bigger picture of what's going on here. Right? So any ideology of any kind radicalizes you over time. This is just a feature of ideology in general. Regardless of the ideology, left-wing, right-wing, religious, non-religious, even scientific beliefs. This is a feature of ideology, right? And if you can't see that, then you're probably too stuck within a particular ideology to see that, right? Because when you're stuck in it, it's hard to see. When this kind of stuff is in the shadow, it's hard to see. That's why I'm here, right? And I point to it very directly. I might have pissed off some people or something already. I don't know. But don't expect to not get triggered when someone is trying to point out to your shadow. There's a good video on YouTube. It's Carl Jung triggers a patient's shadow. And just to briefly summarize it, the patient is just describing her experience with him, and she's like, why is everyone so mean to me? And she's like, Carl Jung's response is, why are you so mean to everyone else? And she just gets triggered and she gets up and leaves the office, right? And then I guess in the future she comes back, right? Because at that moment in time, she wasn't really ready to realize her shadow. She just projected it onto Carl Jung and then just bounced. But then later on, it clicked. Later on, she was able to actually get it. Right? So if you are in forms of just if you're just really ideological about these kinds of things, it's going to completely destroy your ability to have a very conscious relationship to the opposite sex. Right? And be safe. Right? Especially if you're a girl, be safe. Right? A lot of guys lack empathy in very blatant ways. The majority of them, probably. Not even probably. Yeah, they do. Right? Right? And even if you're a guy, watch out, who you have sex with. Right? There's a shared commonality here between men and women that our species is very sick, selfish, and twisted in a lot of ways. Right? You don't want the energy of just anyone. right? So just watch out. So if you basically ever want to have a healthy, conscious relationship to the other sex, you actually must heal and become aware of your unconscious frustration, anger, resentment, power struggles, resistance, judgment, and hatred for the opposite sex. You have to actually watch your desire to want to manipulate them, exploit them, specifically for personal gain. There's no good relationship when all this stuff is just like under the surface and it's like very deep in your psychology, because even if, let's say, you do have a conscious relationship, by the very definition of it being a conscious relationship, things that are unconscious are going to come out, which is exactly this stuff that I'm talking about in this video. Things like this, childhood wounds as well, right? You're gonna have to kind of just end overgeneralizing the entire opposite sex, avoidance behavior, victim mentality, blaming, passive aggression. You actually need to become aware of your own shadow dynamics and how badly they fuck up your relationships. They fuck up your whole life. So this is a little bit of a triggering topic, right? And our shadow builds up in a multitude of ways, through personal life experience, wounds that we experience in childhood, through our shared history, right? And we're at the point now where it doesn't take long to go on the internet, find a video, and it's some guy who has a very clear underlying frustration for women, or vice versa. And basically, you want to avoid things that just reek of an underlying frustration towards 90% of the opposite sex, if not the entire opposite sex. You want to cultivate the ability to have compassionate curiosity towards other beings. See, when you're judging them and you're just kind of projecting your shadow onto them, but when you're stuck in judgment and just hatred and blame, this is a clear sickness. And you can't see them properly. With compassionate curiosity, it's you're non-reactive, you're a little bit more detached from your own self-agenda, and it's you can properly probe into the situation, right? So, if this video triggered you, I don't know, let me know in the comment section below. Tell me I'm a fucking asshole. I actually tried to record this video once, and I was accused of blaming feminism or defending men, or what else? Seeing women as objects. I don't know, man. I got accused of some interesting stuff. So I deleted it, and I wanted to just sharpen my ideas a little bit more. Actually have empathy for the experience of the opposite sex and really understand why, without framing 90+% of the opposite sex as just fundamentally horrible, right? Have actual compassion for the circumstances that humanity finds itself in. I guarantee you, when you bring compassionate curiosity to the situation, this is a shift in your approach and will actually aid you in developing a more accurate view of the situation. Right? And really just notice your attachment to just getting what you want. I mean, this is literally what humans are doing 24/7, even in their relationships. Which I'm not saying there's anything bad with that, right? This is how we survive. But I'm saying that when you're overly attached to it, this is going to really screw up your ability to just connect in meaningful ways to the opposite sex, or see them, relate to their experiences, see why things are the way that they are, right? And do you really want to live your entire life just harboring resentment and frustration for the opposite sex? At one point, either you're going to clean this up within yourself, or for the rest of your life, you're just going to have unconscious hatred within you, and it's stored in your body. It is literally stored in your body, and it is it's suffering. It sucks. I guarantee you, if you want to live a more happy, peaceful life that's more harmonious, with the flow of life and with people, right? You're probably going to want to clean up some of this shadow stuff. It's not pleasant to just, it's just, there's tension in it. It's physiological tension and just it's just so stuck. It's your development is now stuck. You can't evolve any further if you insist on these shadow bullshit, this kind of stuff, just staying there. There's going to be a glass ceiling to your development as a human being. All right, super triggering topic. If you want help cleaning up some of this shadow stuff, I do offer one-to-one coaching. You can apply for a discovery call. Link is in the pinned comment and the description. Take it easy.